Can we have Esther Nyanzi?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to have us participate online. My name is Esther Nyanzi from UNREA. UNREA, we are the Uganda National Development and Energy Efficient Alliance. A platform that brings together the private sector players in the renewable energy and energy. We are following. Thank you so much for the deliberations that are going on, and also for giving us a platform, those that couldn't be here, to be able to participate.
Thank you, Esther. Let's have Daniel Okello. I see you near. Can we have you near?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Aini. I'm from the East of the Uganda Water and Sanitation NGO Network in the local aspect. As we are happy to really start engaging this subsector because within our network, many of our members may focus on water and sanitation originally, but insurance is the new element coming in because the Ministry of Water and Environment is calling on us to estimate data program. So thank you for enabling us to be online. I also have a colleague there in the room, Caroline, looking forward to the outcome of the city and to further partnership with CAN and all the other members. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, colleagues. I think we've heard from Mr. Daniel Okello, but moving forward we shall get you. Let's proceed. Right now we're going to listen into the presentation on the progress of long-term strategies development, where we shall have the presentation right online from our colleague from GIZ, I think, first. I think we are those who are ready. There will be one made by GIZ and another one made by the Institute of, made by Foster Daniel. Foster Daniel will be the presentation. Are you there? Who's coming first?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I will shortly share my screen. There is a little bit of an echo for those people who are dialing in on Zoom. So perhaps if you can mute the microphones in the room when I speak, that may help.
Okay.
Okay. I can't appear to share my screen. It says host disabled screen sharing, so if IT can resolve that, please. Okay, I still can't share my screen. Not possible to share my screen.
Daniel, we are trying to work out and how best you can share your screen from source. Kindly be patient as we try to put it right.
Okay, thank you.
But you can as well also try that site to click on share your screen and we see whether we can have it.
Yes, when I click the button it says the host is disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, let's make efforts to be the host, see how best we can have you. But moving forward, you can be introducing yourself.
Sure, I will begin anyway, and when it works we can go. So good morning everyone. I'm sorry I can't be in the room with you today. Project that has been commissioned by GIZ to support the development of the LTS for Uganda. So maybe to start, it's useful to think about what the long-term strategy actually is. So the long-term strategy is a document which is something which is requested by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So it's a Unit 3 CCC requirement. And the long-term strategy includes a number of different elements. The first element is, can you just bear with me? Okay, I can share my screen now, that looks excellent. Thank you.
Excellent.
Hopefully you can see the screen now?
Yep.
Excellent.
Make it a bit bigger than that. Excellent. Excellent. Proceed.
Okay. So as I was saying, the long-term low emissions development strategy has a number of different elements. The first element is that the strategy is long-term, and by long-term, the UNFCCC describe it in terms of mid-century, so to 2050 at least. It has a low emissions, so low greenhouse gas emissions element. So that's about understanding future emissions and the future pathway of emissions. So that's another component of the long-term strategy. The development element, or the strategy, is aligned with the wider development objectives and goals of the country. And finally is the strategy element. So it's a strategic document, and by that it's about describing the journey, if you like, to deliver the vision. And because it's strategic and longer term, it's necessarily, if you like, higher level than you would expect from the NDC document. I think the final thing, whilst not explicit within, if you like, the description of the long-term strategy, it can also include climate change adaptation considerations, and including strengthening resilience and reducing vulnerability. So those are the main, if you like, that's the description of the long-term strategy. And in terms of kind of context, in terms of where we are globally, in terms of preparation of long-term strategies, to date, and this is earlier this month, there was a total of 29 parties to the UNFCCC, representing 42 countries have submitted their long-term strategy to date. That includes just 2 countries in Africa, Benin and South Africa. So in developing its long-term strategy, Uganda is very much being leading in terms of its climate action, and will be one of the early adopters of a long-term strategy, at least in Africa. So what are the components of a long-term strategy? So there was a number of key elements, some I've described already. I mean, first and foremost is the overall vision, and this is really important because this is describing where Uganda as a country would like to be over the long term from a climate change and economic development perspective. And then the rest of the strategy, if you like, is describing the journey or the potential pathways in order to deliver that overarching vision. and that can include, as I've mentioned, adaptation activities. So what are the key adaptation actions needed to deliver the vision? And also mitigation actions. So what is the pathway with respect to greenhouse gas emissions in order to be consistent with that overarching vision? And then in addition to that, there will be things which describe how the strategy should be implemented, how it should be monitored, and also how it should be revised, because it should be a document that gets revised on a regular basis as context changes, I guess. So they're the main, if you like, components, and what I will do now briefly is to describe the work that we've done so far with respect to those components and the next. So with respect to the vision, as I said, the vision is really about describing the overall aspirational goal. Is typically captured in a vision statement, so a short, simple and transparent statement of what the goal of the strategy is. And what that may include would, as I said, include long-term, so it's about a long-term goal vision. It may include something around the objective with respect to adaptation, enhancing resilience. It would include something with respect to the low carbon or greenhouse gas goal, if you like. And it would also capture economic development and other wider development goals, potentially also. And in developing the goal for the long-term strategy as a whole, it's really important to take into account the goals or objectives that already exist within plans, strategies, and other policy documents within Uganda. So as part of the work, what we've done is we've reviewed these key documents and sort of pulled out the key objectives, goals that exist already, so we can make sure that the long-term strategy and the vision within it are consistent as far as possible and compatible with those other wider goals and objectives. So where we are is we've carried out a review of those existing documents, and we've also looked at the vision statements within other long-term strategies, and then based on that we've started to put together some draft words, if you like, of what the vision for Uganda's long-term strategy may look like. And you know, this is very much open for consultation, and this is an initial draft, but the sorts of things we're talking about are it's a vision for the people in the country, it's about thriving, it's about moving to a modern and prosperous society which is consistent with Vision 2040. This transition should take into account low carbon activities, but also enhancing climate resilience, and also emphasises the important role of climate change adaptation within Uganda. So we have some initial ideas, if you like, and some initial thoughts based on existing documents of what this vision will look like, but it's also really important to get stakeholder views and to build consensus around a vision which is developed for the long-term strategy. So then in terms of the next steps for the vision, we have this briefing paper as I've described, which provides the analysis that we've carried out to date and some initial ideas on what the vision may look like. But as I said, getting stakeholder views on our vision is important, and then based on that we will then review and refine the vision, and then that will be drafted into the overall strategy document. So moving on to the next component of the strategy, which is about the adaptation elements. So what we've done is we've carried out a review of the climate vulnerabilities within Uganda. So this is about looking at sensitivities within key sectors. This is about looking at the adaptive capacity within the sectors that exists already. And then on top of that, we then looked at future long-term climate scenarios. So what are the expectations within different studies of the future climate within different regions within Uganda? And then bringing those elements together, we then looked at the exposure of the key climate vulnerabilities and hazards, and what the key risks are within key sectors, and what is the level of risk within key sectors. So following that risk assessment, then we understand the areas over the long term, where it's important that the strategy will have a focus, if you like, in terms of building adaptive capacity, enhancing resilience, and then that feeds into the identification of some specific options, if you like, to enhance resilience. So the key steps I've already described a little bit. So we carried out a vulnerability assessment, and then we overlaid on that evidence on future climate scenarios, which then gives us an idea of the key kind of risks within each of the key sectors over the longer term. So based on that, that helps us understand those sectors that need adaptation, effort, and resilience needs to be built, but also across the whole of the economy. So what we did then in step 4 is develop what we call adaptation pillars. And if you like, these pillars are the key fundamental elements that we think should form part of the strategy. I will describe them shortly, but it's about, over the longer term, in terms of enhancing adaptive capacity, building resilience, these are the key pillars that we think should form a long-term strategy, if you like. And then at a slightly more granular level, we then in the next step have begun to identify some adaptation options. So these may be specific actions in specific sectors, so it's a slightly more detailed level. It's still very much about long-term action, but it's beginning to define more specific, more granular actions to be taken. And then in the final step, we will then carry out an assessment of these options. So try and understand a bit more what they mean in terms of some options, for example, will have mitigation benefits, so there'll be both adaptation options but deliver mitigation benefits. And then there'll also be wider development benefits associated with them. So this assessment helps understand what the overall impact of implementing them will be. I think it's really important to say at this point that there's a clear link here between the long-term strategy and the nationally determined contribution, the NDC. And whilst the risks, the vulnerabilities will be the same, the focus of the LTS is on sort of, if you like, the higher level pillars and the longer term actions, whereas the NDC is very much about what needs to be done in the short term. So it's about short-term prioritisation of those options, those pillars, if you like. And in terms of where we are in the process, so we've completed steps 1 through to 5. We've developed the pillars, we've developed a long list of these adaptation options. We just haven't assessed the options in detail. Resilient agriculture sector through the production and value change, we feel should be a really key pillar of the long-term strategy. Some of these are a bit more cross-cutting, so they cover more than other sectors. for example, mainstreaming of climate change in education applies to all sectors potentially, and then some others are a bit more sector specific. So we don't have time, unfortunately, to talk through these in any detail today, but we'll obviously share the slides, and there's an opportunity for people to feedback in the Q&A. So in terms of the next steps for adaptation, so we've obviously developed the analysis so far, and we're now seeking feedback on those elements, and in particular the pillars, and then the adaptation options. Following this feedback, we will then finalise the pillars and the adaptation options, and then we will then move on to assessing the impacts of the options, or identifying the wider benefits associated with them in terms of mitigation co-benefits or the development benefits, to give a sense of the wider impacts of the strategy, if you like. And then it will be a case of thinking about, okay, if this forms the strategy, what does that look like in terms of implementation? Who is responsible? How do we monitor progress? And then all of these elements will be integrated into the final draft, well, the draft LTS document first, and then following further review, the final LTS document. So that was adaptation, and then the other key element of the strategy, as I mentioned at the outset, is the mitigation. So this is very much about the future greenhouse gas emissions pathway. And what we've been doing is modelling emissions pathways. So we've started with a business as usual scenario. So what we feel long-term emissions may look like from key sectors, if you like, without any further mitigation action, without any more policy action, without any more climate finance to support projects. And then what we're in the process of doing now is looking at mitigation scenarios. And this is very much about saying what is possible within Uganda over a longer term. So, you know, what does a low carbon economy look like in a Ugandan context, you know, in 2050 or beyond, recognizing that that emissions may peak before they start to decline within developing economies such as Uganda. So as I said, we've started to develop our business as usual scenario, which covers all sectors and is over the longer term, so it goes to 2050 and in some cases beyond. And then we're beginning to assess the mitigation scenarios, so exploring, you know, what is possible, but also alongside what is possible, it's also important to think about what that vision is. So what Uganda as a country would like to be like, you know, what it should strive to be over the longer term from a low carbon perspective, and then that may give some different pathways in terms of, you know, what the timescale is for ambition, and how quickly mitigation happens to reduce emissions over the longer term. So we've identified some mitigation measures, and we're beginning to understand what they look like, and then what we will do next is then develop, as I said, develop these pathways and understand what is possible and what aligns with the overarching vision. And as I said, the key thing here is about thinking about what Paris compatibility looks like, and the Paris Agreement says essentially that parties should aim to reach global peaking emissions as soon as possible. But it does recognise that peaking will take longer for developing countries, but there is a need to undertake rapid reductions thereafter. So there is the need for greenhouse gas emission ambition in terms of reducing those emissions, and it's about understanding what the pathways may look like in terms of how quickly that happens to some extent, and what that looks like within different sectors, because there's more potential in some sectors than other sectors, or it's more difficult to reduce emissions in some sectors. And obviously this all needs to be compatible with Uganda's development pathway. So making sure that we're not just looking at emissions in isolation, we're looking at what that means in terms of the other development goals. There's almost what we will be consulting on soon, and then based on the feedback on that, we will then update this usual scenario and then develop the mitigation pathways. Then they will be updated before they get integrated into the final long-term strategy document.
Foster, you've indeed made a lot of sense. Not only you have made sense, but a lot of sense. And I want to thank you very much for that very interesting presentation. Aware of how far we've done. Of course, it's very important for us to learn that the LT strategy is a document required. It's a requirement by United Nations Food Commission on climate change. And taking us through the different elements also puts us in a very good position. And we are able now aware of the submissions made by the LT that in Africa, at least 42 countries have conformed. And very importantly, giving us the 4 components of the long-term strategy gives our country in a very good state. But very importantly, the adaptation plan as a priority at country level in Uganda forms a big part of where we want to go. And not downplaying the mitigation action alongside the long-term vision and then the implementation aspect of that. What comes out is that at the end of the day, when we are championing the low carbon and climate resilience as a country, we realize that the 12 pillars are very, very important. And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That has been Daniel. He's still online. Before we come into another person, I will agree that the members here would have 1 or 2 questions, observations to shoot. Even those online will come in, but the rest of the responses shall be made by your colleague Arthur, who is in the line. Over to you. 1 or 2, Secretary, please be very fast. Secretariat, carry the microphone. Thank you. Ensure the microphone is sanitized. Yeah.
Okay. I've been so happy with the presentation. It is very good. My question is that you, as a presenter and someone who is leading the formulation of a long-term strategy, you are aware that we usually build our adaptation or mitigation on climate change, or we have to build on what we have been doing. Something which has been done for maybe it might be 20, 30, 50 years. Now I would like to know this strategy, where is it starting? Because the reason why I'm asking where does it start from, that for so long time we have been talking about conserving water, conserving soil, conserving, increasing biodiversity, planting trees, conserving forests. All those means that we are contributing to the mitigation or adaptation about climate change. Therefore, I'd like to know where does that start from, and then those people who have started, because for us we have started sometime about 30 years back, and we are almost achieving what you are doing, what you are about the framework. We are among those who are who will be counted. Those people who have already, who started long ago. Where are we?
Thank you very much.
Where are we?
Yeah. Precisely, where are we in the process? Next, come here. First, I think you picking the comments very loud and clear.
Thank you very much, Costa, for your submission. Mine is not a question, but it's a comment. This week, the Office of the Prime Minister launched a National Vulnerability and Risk Atlas. I don't know if you have looked at that, but it will give very good material to support you when you do the vulnerability assessment. Thank you.
I hope you got it. How best have you interacted with the National Vulnerability and Risk Atlas to inform what you've shared? Next.
I will speak to strategic issues. We have all these good ideas. We are doing a lot as civil society. The government through CCD has made efforts. But I think we're moving too fast, because if you look at the commitments the country is doing, there is a responsibility to them to actualize those commitments. And I'm saying the question of climate change is not for the agencies of government or a few CSOs. It is for every citizen, including the corporate citizens. And we know that the people bearing a lot of effects are in the private sector, especially the manufacturing and natural gas. We know that the climate change bill provides for compliance and regulatory mechanisms. We are not saying that the law penalizes transgressions in climate change, but they have mechanisms of remedies that they provide. But up to now, the bill is almost five years within the process of getting enacted, and it is not. And when you ask Ministry of Finance, they say we still have challenges on compliance of the financial implications. Now, you, the donor community, my thinking is you should be looking at fast-tracking the process of enacting, first and foremost, the legal framework, which is the climate change law. We need that very fast. Together with it, there are about other 5 supporting legislations in the pipeline. I'm sure you're aware of them. Then the institutional framework, CCD, that has the mandate to deliver on the implementation agenda. We know that all these plans are costed because the budget must be made. But we know that CCD itself, which is the apex of the institutional framework, is underfunded. Even when you look through the ministerial budget policy statements for the Ministry of Water and Environment, there's very little going to this department. We are speaking big, but the people supposed to be championing because the institutional framework are underfunded. I needed to hear from the government partners what you have on achieving this. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. About the process of putting right the long-term strategy at country level. But question, let him respond. Daniel, over to you.
Thank you. Sorry, the internet connection was not so good, so I may not have picked up all the questions. So maybe to respond to the first question in terms of where we are in the process, which I think is a really good point. And in terms of the if you like, the adaptation and mitigation journey, then what we're trying to do here is think about the longer term. And I think that recognises that things will have happened in the past, but there's a need for things to develop and things will change in the future. And what we're trying to do is to understand where those priorities may look like, both in terms of future adaptation, but also future emissions. And the NDC is the process where if you like, the short-term actions will be prioritised. And for some sectors that may involve, we're talking over 30 years, so there will be maybe quite large structural changes in some of the sectors. So I think it really does depend though on the specific sectors, and for some areas there will be a lot of action that's already taken place, and the focus will really be about building the resilience as far as possible, because the climate conditions may get worse, or they are likely to be worsened, so there is a need for further adaptation and resilience building as a priority, even though things may happen already. So I think that was the first question. Hopefully I answered that one satisfactorily. Then there was the questions around institutional capacities and responsibilities, and I think that's a really good point. And ultimately, the strategy is only relevant, it's only valuable if it gets implemented. And if there's support and funding and legal structures in place and governance in place in order to make that happen. I think what we can do as consultants is help to identify what that might look like, identify where the priorities are, and where the needs are, and I think that provides a good basis for taking things forward. But ultimately, I think as was mentioned in the room, it does need the legal processes in place, it does need the funding, and that's where international donors can help to some extent, but it's about having that mechanism in place to actually take the strategy forward once it's been developed. I didn't actually hear the third question, I'm afraid, so if you can please
Daniel, you can also check your WhatsApp. I was trying to full send the questions in case you missed it. Look at your WhatsApp, we have shared some questions you missed to help you catch up. But what was coming in is, have you interfaced with the National Vulnerability and Risk Atlas to inform?
I think we've engaged with different organisations and we've looked at different research. There may be other engagement that we need to do as part of the process. So if there are some specific suggestions around that, we can do some further engagement.
Yes. You try to get another feedback online? I know many of the people online also sending in a feedback, so be very fast to keep looking on the screen for some of the feedback, questions, observations, and remarks. Then you can also respond to them as we get more other people online and within the room.
Okay.
There is one from Humphrey. Humphrey is saying, when would be...
Yeah, thank you so much, Daniel, and the team. I really liked your presentation. I know it was short, but I think we shall dig into the detail. Now that agriculture is rating 4.04, 4.07 on the vulnerability and 4.18 on the risk side, you see that it is a causer but also a cushion sector, in the emissions and things. I am hoping that this strategy is going to be in a way supported by the legal, or say the policy framework of the country, but also the practice side of things. How are you going to handle, because already there is a written strategy for agriculture for the next 5 years. There is already a vision 2040. There is already, all these plans already laid. How is the LTS going to fit this? Because it's already written, content, done, and yet we want to come up with sustainable supportive policies that may have been not fit in the written content already, which were passed. These are strategies, plans, visions. Yet we need very good supporting policies and very strong extension systems that will support this. How is the LTS already twinning in and blending into the already written documents? Secondly, I liked the development of the mitigation scenarios. I am wondering when this is going to be done and completed, because yes, you say the process is on, but I would like to ask when that is going to be done and how shall we know. Lastly, yes, I saw the business wing, but as private sector, we would want this long-term strategy a long-term strategy to give the private sector a duty or a very good role to play, because these are the biggest emitters. So I would like to see a lot of strategies, plans, and actions going to these people. You know, the private sector, we emit a lot. So I'm thinking that in the fuel handlers and the people that are going to really be at the forefront of reducing the emissions and things, private sector has a big role to play, other than other sectors, because we are the biggest emitters. So I wonder where that fits properly. But I thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. That's a very good one. Let's one from Miriam, then you respond.
Yeah, thank you very much, Daniel, for such a very good, elaborate, and short presentation. It's really been informing. I would like to chip in very fast on the granular aspects. On top of financing that you already talked about, that is a need, I think when we talk about scenario and business as usual, in one consideration, I think we also need to add to it the fact that Uganda as a country, the realities of capacity are glaring. So our expectation would be, especially now that agriculture has been highlighted as the biggest major, one of the major vulnerable sectors, it would be very nice for us to also talk about the technology. Technology, while we can have scenarios built at this time, continuously the effects of climate change are going to manifest differently, and therefore the issue of technology, relevant technology, it could be through transfer, it could be through financing, it could be either way, but it's very critical that that is emphasized in this strategy. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Miriam. Daniel, proceed to respond on those, what technologies will suit the scenario of mitigation and the role of the private sector. Proceed.
Okay, thank you. So yes, just to respond to Humphrey's points first, I think there was 3 points in there. The first one was around how we blend, in the case of agriculture, as we develop the pathway for agriculture, we will obviously underpin that with work that's already been carried out for the agriculture sector. So I think the key point is that we're not doing something in isolation. What we're trying to do here is build upon those existing plans and strategies as far as possible. But what we are maybe doing, which is different, is putting a climate lens, if you like, on those studies and saying, okay, what does it mean if we take into account future climate change in terms of those strategies, or what does that mean in terms of mitigation within the sector? So hopefully that answers that question. There was a specific question around when the mitigation work is going to be done. So this is ongoing at the moment in parallel. We just don't have results to share just yet. So it will be happening over the next 3 to 4 weeks. You know, we will be developing the initial mitigation scenarios. I expect there will be a bit of an iterative approach, because if you think about some of the issues, there are interactions. So a really good example of that is energy use in terms of bioenergy and charcoal, and what that means in terms of emissions from forestry. So there's interactions between sectors, and that's one of the things we'll probably iterate on and develop as the project gets further evolved. In terms of the role of private sector, then yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think once we have the strategy and we have something which is an understanding of what may happen within key sectors, and then in terms of the implementation, it's about understanding about who is empowered to make those changes, to influence those actions, who are the actors that need to build resilience, actually, and how do we go about doing that? So I think that's sort of towards the end of the process, where it's focusing on implementation steps, but I think it's a really important part also. And then the second question was about technology, and I think, and how that's reflected in the pathways. I think that's really important. As I said, what's different between the NDC and the LTS is the LTS is about long term, so we're talking potentially 30 years ahead. So whereas the NDC is perhaps sometimes constrained a little bit about what can happen in the short term, the LTS doesn't necessarily have those constraints. So one of the things to think about in the pathways is if there's opportunities, if you like, for technology leaping. So rather than just evolving in some sectors, you know, is there a case of moving straight to low carbon technologies, and rather than having intermediate steps? So, you know, some of these technologies that will be more cost effective, because cost is the issue ultimately, in 10 or 15 years, you know, they may then be able to play a key part in the future strategy within Uganda, even if they're too expensive to be part of the strategy now. So I think understanding what those options are and what that means, I think is one of the things we will explore in our scenarios. But it does relate very much to the NDC, and I think the NDC will look at specific things in more detail, look at specific technologies, whereas the LTS is a little bit higher level than that. So we'll talk about technologies, but perhaps in a less detailed way, in a more general way.
Daniel, the very last one, well, as we conform to the thought that the LT is long term, 30 years plus, but in one of the key components of the LT, adaptation action tends to be a priority at country level here. Now, I want you to respond to the question which came in, which you have not sufficiently responded to, in line with the strategies in place for agriculture, Vision 2040. How, he asked, how do they twin? We are talking about a long-term strategy. And at a country level, we already have system strategies, particularly in the agriculture sector, which seem not to be aligned to the long term, but separate at country level. So he was asking, how does it twin? How do they tally? You didn't respond to that one very well. I don't know whether you get the communication.
Yes, it's about twinning the long-term strategy with, my understanding is it's about twinning the long-term strategy with existing sectoral strategies, such as the...
Excellent, excellent, yeah.
Yeah, so the way that they will be aligned is firstly in terms of the vision, so making sure that the goal of those sectoral strategies is similar to the goal, or the, let's say, the goal of the LTS is not inconsistent with the goal. I think the other way that we would look at twinning them is in terms of the scenarios that we develop. So, for example, if there's within the agriculture plan, there is an objective to develop the sector in a certain way, to have a certain mix of crops, to expand production, then what we will try to do is make sure our scenario reflects those assumptions. So at the very least, one of the scenarios within the LTS will twin, if you like, the assumptions within the sectoral strategy. What we will then though have to do is think about, okay, well, what happens then when we take climate into account, and that may lead to an alternative. You know, within one scenario it may be fully consistent or largely consistent with the sectoral plan, but another scenario may involve more mitigation or more adaptation action, and then there may be a deviance between them. But the idea is we'll try and be clear as possible where these existing plans and strategies are fed in and where they're captured within the strategy.
Thank you. Humphrey, your hand is still up. Humphrey, are you there? Humphrey Mtasa. Pose your question to Daniel. Humphrey? I see your hand still up.
No, I had just forgotten to put it down, sorry. Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.
Any other one or two to foster? Other responses shall be made by Arthur is still in the room. In case there is anything very quick. But a very quick suggestion here, Daniel, before you go. They say that the strategy should spell out a framework for civil society contribution in terms of action and a schedule on when and how we can engage. You get it? Would you want to comment on that suggestion? Yeah, very quickly you can make a comment. But of course it's a suggestion. You either take it or leave it. But the members are saying the strategy should spell out a framework for civil society contribution and action. And the schedule on when and how we can engage is very, very important. What's your take as a consultant?
I think that's a really good point. I think that I suppose there's two elements to that. Is engaging in the development of the strategy, which we're doing now, and then once the strategy is in place, is making sure that civil society have a role in reviewing progress with the strategy. You know, as I said, it should be an ongoing process. There will be a strategy there, but that should be, you know, updated over time as things, you know, as the economy develops, as understanding within the country develops. And I think civil society should be part of that process. It should be a collective vision for the country, shared by all as far as possible, and it needs engagement in part of that process.
Okay, thank you very much, Foster. It has been nice. You've responded ably, and if anything, Arthur is in the room, and let's keep the conversation going. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Where is the money?
Arthur will respond. Daniel, where is the money? The question is, where is the money? Very quickly, where is the money? Where is the money? But I remember you responded that your role is to identify where the priorities are and putting mechanisms in place, and also trying to show the stakeholders the need. I think in that way is when we can also get to know what is the money. But you can respond, what is the money?
I think that's one for colleagues in the donor agencies, actually.
Okay, Honorable Kaya wants to make a response for you, Secretariat. Daniel, we have a member of parliament in the room. Over the years, she has been in the climate space for some time. She has been working with, as a coordinator of Parliamentary Forum on Climate Change. Now, she's a member of parliament. So she wants to make a contribution before you go. Over to you, Honorable.
Thank you so much. My comment goes to the consideration of the strategy for the growing population. The trends in the population growth sometimes are left behind. When you even look at our performance as far as the climate change policy is concerned, the NDC, we have tried to tackle much of the strategies and the options. But the challenge is the outreach and the coverage. The contribution is too minute to create any change within our population. So the issue of the increasing population, we request that strategy of up to 2050, please, the population should be incorporated to enable the extensive outreach among our population. Thank you.
Demographics does not cause impact. Can you respond? demographic trends. According to the Member of Parliament, the strategy does not consider, is not conscious on the population growth. And that the outreach and the coverage is not visible. So at the end of the day, no impact created. Make a response.
Okay. Yes, I think that's a really good point. And what we are doing in developing our projections is looking at expectations of future population growth. So essentially what that means is the expectation is that your emissions are going to increase over time, largely driven by a growing population. That will increase, demand for energy. It will increase waste production. It will increase transport. Population is a strong driver of future emissions. So, that's something that we take into account within our business as usual scenario, which will essentially result in, if nothing happens, then your emissions are going to increase, because that is just what happens with a growing population. So then that's really where the alternative scenarios come in, where we say, well, population can continue to grow, but at the same time, how do we then limit the emissions associated with that growth? By switching to lower carbon fuels, increasing renewables, limiting transport or certain amounts of transport to lower emission sources, managing emissions from other sectors. So I think the simple answer is we've taken population into account because it's important in terms of the projections, and we will look at what that means for emissions as part of the analysis ultimately.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, and bye for now.
Goodbye.
Well, you went to Daniel. Give a big round of applause to Daniel for that wonderful contribution, and also everybody responding to. You can as well work the people here, Daniel too, and they see that you closely with them. So thank you very much, Daniel, and ladies and gentlemen, we having another presentation from PIZ on the same. Then thereafter we shall have the minister coming in, and we break for lunch. So that has been Daniel Foster. In case of any other engagement, Arthur is still in the house. So we now going to listen in from PIZ. Yeah, many people have joined us online. I see Ongola is there. And thank you very much for following. I'm from TASA, we missed your contribution. I hope you're still online and we need it. So utilize any available opportunity to ensure that you put your contribution right.
You are married.
Yes, Humphrey. As Sarah is preparing herself, there was an observation from the national coordinator of the capacity. Capacity is still lacking in Uganda. What shall we do? And what do you think would be the key recommendations to our development partners to ensure that much as all this is being done, when the capacity is lacking, it may be quite hard for us to come up with very good technologies which would suit some of these scenarios. That's good for thought, and the good thing is that the Honourable Parliament is here. Capacity, capacity, capacity. Until when shall we talk about capacity? Now that even we are talking about the long-term strategy and the NDC, which is short-term. Sarah, once you're ready, I'm only waiting for your signal. But I thought the members in the House and online, that is a very serious observation as climate champions. As a coordinating entity, Climate Action Network Uganda, in an attempt to position the role of civil society engagement and getting involved in the implementation process, we think is very important. The issue of capacity need to be well thought, well understood, and we come up with a very practical ask to the relevant partners and government on how best, if ideally they appreciate that we are strategic partners in all the processes moving forward. The question of capacity building is very important, and it fits well within what UNDP was sharing this morning. There are so many packages which we are unveiled by UNDP, but at the end of the day, when we evaluate how best has civil society tapped into those windows at UNDP, he mentioned that Senior Kaganga is an ardent visitor to the UNDP, but little did he mention what packages the visitor has gone with from UNDP. That would really make us understand whether, as we frequent and create partnership, there is always the package we go along with. Mr. Kaganga, at a later stage, will tell us, you always visit UNDP, what do you bring to society? We could be here when actually you don't mention what you get from the government partner, so that members can learn from you. But the UNDP chief said you are an ardent visitor there. So we could be blaming the development partners when actually they have done their best. And the man is here. You'll share with us at a later stage. I see a hand. Or you are simply scratching your head. Or you are confirming that you are also part of the guests in UNDP. Next time you go, inform the national coordinator that you have gone to UNDP. Say that she also learns and comes and shares with civil society what are packages other members other than Chikandwa Environmental Association can tap into. In the spirit of leaving no one behind, and I know you were master of that. But now, selfishly, you go. But they are reported that you are there. You are ever there. Mr. Kabishanga, where is the money? And we also ask the senior citizen, how do we look for where the money is? Because when you ask who is the money, you don't also tell us, where do you think we shall go to get the money? At a later stage, it is food for thought, because one of the key things which came out yesterday when we were engaging with the young people, and even today, many of those things came up, and a number of thoughts came through as we plan for where we get the money, or with the money. We should also harness. That's why the question of the private sector involvement is very, very important. How do we look deeper and see that we can also contribute more onto the local financing at country level? Because I remember Aropabu made a statement that we cannot sustain using the foreign contribution. I don't know which person did that. I think it was online, whether it was a consultant from Sarah's angle. Somebody shared with us that we cannot sustain using the foreign contribution, but we can only go forward when we also making our local contributions here. So let's get Sarah. And Sarah, you ready? Yeah. Let's get Sarah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. My name is Sarah Fortunate. I am from Zotari Limited. We are working on updating the national determined contributions. We're working, and right now we have had a number of progress. I would love to share with you some of the findings that so far we have made, so that we can have some feedback from you. So in our discussion, we're going to talk about basically what is the NDC, what and why it should be updated since we developed it in 2015. And then I'll also share with you the scope we are taking to revise the NDC. And then also alongside that, we have conducted a metabolic assessment or a situation analysis of what is currently happening since the NDC was developed in 2015, so that the current situation can be included in the updated NDC. So far, we've done a bit of assessment on the mitigation as well as the adaptation, and these are the ones that we are going to share with you at the moment, and be able to get some feedback from you. And if there's any action either on the adaptation or mitigation that we could have left out that you as a society organization are implementing, or you is implemented within the updating of the NDC, then we welcome those contributions so that we can have them captured. So I will not go into the details of what the NDC is, but I'll say that in 2015, that is when Uganda also submitted its NDC. At the time, it was the intended determined contribution as a part of the Paris Agreement discussions, and once the Paris Agreement came into force in 2016, then this became binding. So basically, the parties to the Paris Agreement are required to undertake and communicate NDCs so that they are ambitious. This should be ambitious contribution to achieve the purpose of the Paris Agreement. So these NDCs, one should include the adaptation, which would involve the targets as well as the actions, but also in terms of measures of implementation, as well as the mitigation targets and actions. So this is what we are following as we also update the NDC to ensure that the adaptation, targets, actions, as well as mitigation actions and the targets are included as well. So why are we updating the NDC? As I mentioned that Uganda submitted its NDC, developed it in 2015. So since 2015, a lot of changes and progress has been made, and thus these need to be communicated so that this need to be communicated to the UNFCCC so that one, the current documentation is relevant and is implementable. So having submitted the latest NDC in 2015, as I mentioned, now we need to submit an updated NDC to comply with the 5-year requirements of the Paris Agreement. and this needs to show progress beyond the first NDC. So, as mentioned, the country submitted, and then since have been progress in this situation, and this needs to be communicated. And as since the 2015 development of the NDC, some of the changes that have happened, or some of the studies that have been conducted, for which we have also visited to update the NDC that we're currently working on. Some of these reports that have been conducted, like the Climate Risk and Vulnerability Assessment Report. This was conducted in 2018. The National Energy Policy has been updated. Of course, the Vision, Uganda Vision 2040, someone had already highlighted, asked about that to Daniel when he was presenting. And then these other reports, strategies, plans, policies that we have also looked at. And these are actions, targets that these policies, these documentations have so far identified and included. We are also customizing them into the updating process of the NDC. Next, please. So the rule book, the information necessary to facilitate clarity, transparency, and understanding of the Paris rule book, particularly on the adaptation sections, clearly spells out what should be involved, what should be contained in the NDC. This is basically to ensure that every country is transparent in what they are communicating. And these are the contents that we are working on and including within the updating process that we are currently conducting. So basically the national circumstances and the institutional arrangement and legal frameworks. This already has been highlighted in our earlier discussions. Someone asked about that. So I will not go again through all of them in the interest of time, but these are the contents of the draft that we are working with at the moment. So again, the contents as per the rule book continues, and then we are looking at quantifiable information on the reference points. So this should include appropriate and base year. So from this section, we are basically determining some of the baseline status, for instance, for the waste sector and all this, and we'll share a little bit more as we go along. So the scope and the coverage, the description of the sectors, all this is what the rule book under this section requires that NDCs should communicate, so that there's the transparency, clarity, and understanding of the NDCs that are submitted. So this is the process that we have undertaken to be able to achieve so far the assessments that we have done. We started off with the inception and the launch. This has already been completed. And we have also conducted a metabolic assessment or a situation analysis to understand, since 2015, when the NDC was submitted, what have been the changes in terms of the consumption in the various sectors, but also in terms of emissions for each sector, and which sectors are key in terms of population growth, employment, and also emission generation. So that we have also completed, and at the moment we have started on the step number 3, where we are at. We kickstarted it off yesterday with consultation with the youth, and now we are with you, and we carry out other 5 regional workshops, so that feedback and comments from the stakeholders can be incorporated within the updated NDC. Once that is completed, then we will draft up the NDC. We will enhance the mitigation and adaptation targets from the old NDC, so that the new ones have new enhanced and new adaptation and mitigation targets that could have been missing, but also those that are already involved in the current NDCs, they are enhanced. So we also conduct a cost-benefit analysis of the actions for both mitigation and adaptation. We've done a little bit of that already, and then we will also include the NDC finance strategy. Someone had already asked about where is the money, and through this strategy, that question will be answered once it is implemented. Then the fifth step would be validation. We will come back to you and say, these are the results, so that you can validate them as okay, so that there's the country ownership, and then the NDC will be finalized, developed, as well as communication packages to it. So these are the steps that we have taken. So for the situation assessment or the metabolic analysis, as I've already mentioned, this basically was to show which sectors in terms of consumption and production, but also how are they emitting emissions, so that they can be utilized in the reprioritization of these sectors and inclusion within the NDC. Next, please. From the findings that we have so far obtained, we still note that agriculture and the land use and forestry sector still in Uganda are responsible for the highest emission, as had been communicated in the current NDC. And this, again, we have seen it within the situation analysis that we conducted. And also, again, on the right, we also see that in terms of deforestation, which falls under the land use change, we see we have only had a forestation rate increase by 2.9%. Deforestation has continued to increase by 1.5%. We're looking from the area of 2000 and in the area of 2015, where 2015 is when we got the current NDC. So again, this assessment has shown us that the agriculture and land use and forestry sector are still very key in terms of emission generation within Uganda as compared to the other sectors. Next, please. Again, this is just to show this. We use these results of the situation analysis to do a prioritization of which sectors, again, can be included in the updated NDC. And clearly you can see agriculture, which is represented by the green, is taking on is responsible for the biggest chunk of the emission reductions. However, it is also responsible for contribution highly to the growth development, the GDP of the country, as well as the employment opportunities that it's providing, as well as resource consumption-based resource and production of greenhouse gas emissions. So you see, as I just mentioned in the previous slide, that agriculture, land use change, and forestry are not only responsible for the highest emissions that the country is currently generating, but is also responsible for employment, for economic development, and all these others. The food and the beverage sector is now coming out strongly as one of those that is generating emissions. And based on this metabolic assessment, where we use the sustainable production and consumption analysis tool, these are the sectors that we are proposing that will be included within the NDC based on the current situation. Next, please. So again, this situation analysis in terms of helping us to prioritize, as I've already mentioned, we see that agriculture is coming out prominently, and then new sectors like the households, and the reasons as to why the agriculture, these sectors are being prioritized highly for the new updated NDC, as well as some of them are also included within the current running NDC. It is basically in terms of consumption of high resource use, emission generation, as well as their contribution to the employment of the country. So we see that the sectors the tool has prioritized so far in summary, agriculture, households, education, health, and other services. Mining and quarrying is another sector which had been quite missing in the current NDC. Then we have the food and beverage, construction, as well as the petroleum, chemical, and non-metallic products. So these are some of the new sectors that we are proposing would be included within the new updated NDC. So in summary, I have already mentioned the sectors that Metabolic Assessment has identified as the key drivers, and this is agriculture, which we have subgrouped into two: the soil, the managed soil, as well as the livestock. Then again, land use is coming in. You see the forests and the lands, then the waste, then the energy, and again the energy we have also categorized it into subgroups as subsector of transport, as well as fuel combustion activities. And here clearly that is where the cooking fuels come in strongly because of biomass usage. So these are the outcomes of the situation analysis that I've been talking about, and these are clearly speaking to the updating process of the NDC. So, as I already alluded to, in terms of our approach to the mitigation assessment and the NDC targets, we have also conducted sectoral scenarios, which we have started the modeling, and this is a process that is continuing so that we can understand or identify how the emissions are going to change from 2015 to 2050. And here, as I already mentioned, we have identified key baselines, and these we hope to finalize also with the discussions and the consultations that we are having. Then mitigation actions are also to be finalized, as we will be including all the feedback that we'll be receiving from you and the other various stakeholders that we'll be consulting. Then lastly, we will conduct a multi-sectorial assessment so that we can weigh which adaptation target or action should be prioritized over the other. And this multi-criteria assessment and the weighting will be finalized basically with the Climate Change Department as well as the NAP, so that at the end of the day with the updated national determined contribution is finalized, it is showing which actions in terms of adaptation, in terms of mitigation, the country has prioritized. So far, the results that we are getting from the baseline assessments that we have conducted for agriculture and land use sectors, as well as the waste sectors, we see that the emissions for Uganda will be increasing greatly from 2015 to 2050 in these sectors by those figures. So these are very key sectors. And the baselines have been determined using the IPCC software for the waste sector, as well as the exact tool, FAO exact tool that has been used for the agriculture, forestry, and land use sector. As we conducted these baselines, we made some assumptions, and it's on some of these assumptions that we would request some feedback on from you and the other stakeholders. while we were assessing for the waste sectors, some of the assumptions we have made are these, and we are indicating that we're making an assumption that most of these parameters remain constant, and we would like to have your feedback on this so that we can also capture them in the baselines that we have determined. Next, please. So from the assessment we have done so far, where extensively we've done for the mitigation from the various documents that I had highlighted a little earlier on that we visited, as well as the current NDC, we see that for the mitigation sector, the mitigation bit, we propose a number of mitigation actions, which a number of studies, reports have highlighted. So in terms of the energy sector and power supply subsector itself, the country through the Vision 2040, as well as the Uganda policy on energy and power, is indicating to achieve at least 3,200 megawatts of renewable energy electricity generation capacity by 2030, and up to 728 megawatts. That was for 2013. So those are some of the studies that we've done, that we have identified some of the strategies. So in terms of the actual measures that the different policy strategies the country has developed since 2015 when the NDC was developed, one of them is in terms of the hydropower generation, so that there is an increase in generation of electricity from this sector, from hydro generation, as well as geothermal, renewable energy as indicated within the policy, renewable energy policy, but which has recently been updated. So, and then also strongly that came out was the National Appropriate Mitigation Action on Sustainable Charcoal Production. This greatly influences the forest sector because of biomass usage. And next please. Still on the energy, but from the demand side of it, subsector, we have identified measures to do with solar PV in schools, and through the Uganda Green Schools NAMA report, this is already has been implemented. Then also promote and uptake improved institutional bookstops in those public and private institutions in the country. Then also research and development has been one of the key measures that has strongly come out from the reports and studies that we have looked at, and all these others which I will not go through due to time issues. Next please. So again, looking at the energy sector, but from the transport subsector, we see some of the measures that the Uganda Green Growth Development Strategy highlighted, as well as the Uganda National Investment Studies are highlighting in terms of environmental tax on old vehicles, which are having large emissions. Then the periodic vehicle inspection for emissions and roadworthiness, and all these other fuel efficiency in motor vehicles, bus rapid transit for Kampala. So all these are some of the other mitigation measures that the various reports and strategies are highlighting, and these are the ones again that will be included, we propose to be included in the updated NDC. For forestry, a colleague had earlier asked this question to Daniel, and these are the initiatives so far we have identified, or measures we have identified from the studies that have been conducted, or reports or activities that have been made since 2015. We see RED Plus initiatives, then provide incentives to farmers to the establishment of commercial wood roads, restoration of degraded wetlands and hilltops. So those are some of the strategies which I can't go into every one of them from the forestry as well as the wetland sector. From the agricultural sector, the studies also indicate that an agriculture sector strategic plan was to be developed that was identified within the Green Growth Development Strategy, but also promotion of high-yielding upland rice as well as climate-smart agriculture under the various techniques for emission greenhouse cultivation of vegetables. So these are some of, again, the mitigation measures that we have identified for the agriculture sector that will be included within the updated NDC. So what are our next steps as we continue with the mitigation sector actions that will be included within the NDC? We will finalize the sectoral baselines that I talked about, the waste, for instance, the waste sector, and then finalization of mitigation action so that we can identify we have identified the current in the current NDC, but also which other new sectors can be included within the updated NDC. Then we will conduct the greenhouse gas mitigation impact assessment for the various mitigation actions so that we also conduct a cost-benefit analysis. So yes, we might have a number of those mitigation and adaptation mitigation actions that I have highlighted. However, which of them are most cost-effective that could be implemented in the next 5 years? So that will be conducted. We have already done a bit of it and we are about to finalize as well. Then also we are to determine enhanced mitigation targets in the current and additional sectors. So, and also include a financing strategy for mitigation. Then after we have finalized all this, we'll draft the updated NDC, which we anticipate to be probably in the next 7 weeks from this to incorporate the inputs from the consultations with the various stakeholders. So this will be these are our next steps as we continue the development or updating the NDC. So as I come to the adaptation side, this we have been working closely with the long-term strategy development process that is Daniel as a team. This because while the LTC is looking at the long-term strategy, we are looking in terms of the short-term, which is the next 5 years. So in terms of working, we are working collaboratively so that the updated NDC and the long-term strategy speak to each other. Because again, for the NDC is looking about the next 5 years, while the LTC is looking beyond the 2050. So the studies, what the preliminary findings Daniel has already shared with us, and I am not going to go through this again. I will go straight to some of the adaptation strategies that we have identified. Next, please. So all these, Daniel has already highlighted to it because we are working on this collaboratively. Next, please. Next, please. Next, please, because this again is what Daniel had already mentioned. So in summary so far, in terms of the proposed adaptation strategies for priority sectors, under the ecosystem sector, we are proposing to include protection of critical ecosystems and nature-based solutions. And earlier on in our discussion, someone had already highlighted that, so we captured that bit. Then under the water sector, we're proposing improved water security. Under the forestry, we are looking at the preventing deforestation, rehabilitation of natural forests. Under the agriculture sector, looking at the National Adaptation Plan for, so this has also highlighted a number of adaptation targets and strategies which we are going to incorporate within the updated NDC. And then under the disaster risk, we are looking also at investments in early warning systems and flood protection, as well as the others in terms of insurance systems and recovery. So these are ones that we are proposing to be included within the updated NDC, and also a cost-benefit analysis for each of them to reprioritize each of these strategies and actions will be undertaken as I had mentioned earlier. So again, I will not go a bit into the detail of this, but just to mention as to re-echo that a cost-benefit analysis for each of the adaptation actions will be conducted, and we are also doing this in our collaboration with the LTC development process. So in terms of specific adaptation actions that have been identified for updating the NDC, we see the current 2015 INDC has already identified a number of actions and programs in the various sectors. So we see agriculture, again, because of its strategic nature, it is having over 7 action areas that have been identified, as well as if you look again for forestry, 11 of them have already identified. So these are what is already in the current NDC, and we will be able to enhance this within the updated NDC. Next, please. So I had already mentioned that we are conducting the multi-criteria assessment of actions, whether for adaptation or mitigation, in collaboration with the LTC development team. And so far, we are seeing 7 impact criteria, which Daniel had already highlighted, of adaptation, mitigation, employment, competitiveness, and all these others. However, we have also identified 2 additional criteria that we will be included within the updated NDC, and that is on coherency as well as cost for each of the actions. So the selected criteria will apply to both the mitigation as well as adaptation actions, and this will be equally done. And these are the actions that will be done. However, in terms of the mitigation, those mitigation actions that lead to a maladaptation, of course, that is something that will be looked into and taken keen as the multi-criteria assessment is being undertaken. So the multi-criteria assessment of priority actions, again, we'll continue this. We have already started with the LTC, but we'll continue it on. As I've already mentioned, those are the criteria we are utilizing, and a bit of the brief description for the various criteria. And the scaling will be from -5 to +5, so that evaluation can be done to be able to do the prioritization of each of the adaptation actions that I have highlighted, and possibly those that we've missed, and we will get from you guys, the stakeholders, and the others that we'll be meeting and engaging in the next few days. So that is where we are at in terms of mapping for the adaptation strategies and actions to be included within the updated NDC. And in terms of the next steps, we will review the list of the identified actions and sub-actions for each sector. We will determine any additional actions not included, as I've already mentioned. They will provide evidence of actions that have already been implemented at the regional level, but probably we have not captured it yet. And then again, we will identify regional priorities. As you will appreciate, adaptation is location specific, the challenges of Eastern Uganda may not necessarily be the challenges of, say, the Equatorial Corridor or Northern Uganda. So this is where it is very key, and we shall include this within the updated NDC to show that for the various regions, these are the priority adaptation actions and strategies that should be implemented. Then just go a little bit. So again, they already mentioned that we have already started with the LTC development process team in terms of the multi-criteria analysis. I will not go again into this detail, but just as we are doing for the mitigation actions, we will also determine enhanced adaptation targets in the current or additional sectors that we will include within the updated NDC. Again, the financing aspect of it, we are developing an approach for adaptation finance, so that we can address the where is the money question that has already been put across. And lastly, once all this we have completed it, then we will be drafting the NDC, and that will be about 8 weeks from our last stakeholder engagement. Like I've already mentioned, this is our second, and we have a couple more to go, specifically 5, which will be regional, and to identify, especially in terms of adaptation priorities, what are the priorities for each region, so that these are well captured into the updated NDC. So these are the preliminary results we have so far, and this is where we are at, and welcome any additions or subtractions so that we can capture your views within the updated NDC. Thank you so much.
So, the young people missed you yesterday. Did you prepare this package for big people or not?
It's the same we shared with them.
Sharing online and hearing you explain locally is different. Thank you very much, Sarah. Give us Sarah a big applause. The assessment looks interesting. It sounds good. It gives hope. And it appears as if it comes from an informative angle. Of course, I will not dwell much into what she has shared, but what is very, very important is the steps she talked about, and the interest of the participants there speak to the proposed adaptation strategies for priority sectors. I know they have much interest in that. Of course, one other thing, the outcome of the assessment, and we're also looking forward for the regional consultations. I think from there, that's when they'll ideally identify their priorities. But it's work in progress. That is how far Sarah and the team have gone with the assessment. I know you have your views, the assessment, and at a stage we shall respond. Reflect on the assessment while having your lunch. When we come back, we shall have Sarah here take off a few minutes to respond to the assessment as we prepare our souls' minds to listen in to the ministry. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot continue. Can we even eat? And can the eating be as short as we can? I thought you had already given the coupons a long time ago. Now issuance of coupons will take another 10 minutes. You get a coupon, you stand up and go. The hotel will tell you where to go. But let's bless the name. Yes, itself. Akusa, you come and bless the name. Come. So that even God will bless you in this meeting. You do what you know.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and what you God, we pray for our meal. Enable us to have a meal so that we can have wisdom for the next session and energy. In Jesus' name I pray.
When it comes to food, young people enjoy the stomach. Even the cross go to the stomach. I always see the cross is always customized in the chest, but hers went to the stomach. Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's go for lunch. I'm told the Commissioner, Climate Change Department, is around. So, the faster we have our lunch, the faster we convene, have responses. Sarah needs to get your input to the assessment. Then, Senyonga Derek, the Climate Change Officer, will present on behalf of the Ministry. Then the Commissioner shall open the meeting officially, and we go to the next phase. So let's make time. Everything is safe in here. And I see. Have you read the coupon? Ada, you have a coupon. You stand up. Go for lunch. May I see the people who are doing the live stream go serve lunch first?